Welcome back, everyone. Now we've got Mike Moran with Stopping Botnets with Astrophysics. Mike is a threat researcher and data scientist at Duo Security, now part of Cisco. Before moving into the cybersecurity realm, he earned a PhD in experimental nuclear astrophysics. And the consistent through line for Mike has always been find the rare and interesting events and dig deeper to understand them. I am so excited to find out how astrophysics and botnets relate to each other. Take it away, Mike.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction and good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, this is a story that's near and dear to my heart because it actually is the story of how I got into information security in the first place. Um, and I'm really glad to be able to talk through this and describe not just what you can learn from an astrophysics degree or science in general and apply it to information security, but what are the weird, interesting things that you don't really think about as skills or qualities that you have that make you a good researcher. So to start, I'm going to focus mostly on just this one constellation. If you live in the Northern Hemisphere, you might already know what this is. It's the Orion constellation. It's one of the brightest and easiest to pick out in the winter Northern Hemisphere sky. So if you go out tonight and it's still decently clear, you'll be able to see this as well. I did have to rotate it just to fit on the slide, but if I put in these quick lines connecting the stars, that's sort of the classic Orion shape with a lot of its prominent features picked out. The belt, the bright stars, Betelgeuse and Rigel on the corners. But there's one other part of it that, depending on where you actually live, you might not have seen with an unaided eye before. You might have needed binoculars for it. And that is actually the sword of Orion, sort of hanging down from the belt. On a very clear and dark night, you can see this just with the regular eye. And that takes us to the first part of astrophysics we're talking about. How are stars born? It's kind of weird to think about stars as something that born and live and die because their lifespans are so much larger than ours. But they do go through these very interesting life cycles that come across and evolve in different ways based on a few kind of underlying properties of the stars, which we'll get into. So as we zoom in to Orion's nebula in this, you might think, why does it look like a weird cloud? And it does because this is a superheated mass of hydrogen and helium gas that is the middle of a stellar nursery. So within Orion, there are these stars forming from that condensation of that hydrogen and helium gas into these giant balls that grow and grow based on their mutual gravitic attraction. At some point, there's so much mass in those stars that they actually ignite and start helium fusion. And what we're seeing when we look at the Orion Nebula is both these stars that have already been born and blown away, that interstellar gas envelope, but also the reflected light of that gas behind them sending back to us. And that's where you get these, extremely colorful pictures, such as this one. One fun fact about these, and especially as the James Webb Space Telescope has come online, these pictures are obviously extremely beautiful to look at. I have one as my background right now, one as my desktop background, but they do contain some scientific information as well too. So that coloration can be based on what elements are present. And why we care about what elements are present is that that's kind of how we know how stars go throughout their lifetime. Almost the entire universe is hydrogen and helium. This was a log scale, so by percentage, about 74% of the universe is hydrogen, 24% is helium, 1% is oxygen, 1% is everything else. And to note, before people say, like, no, that's not correct, this is for baryonic matter or matter that is kind of like us and our star. So we're not including dark matter, dark energy, any unforeseen or undeclared things. This is just sort of the regular quote unquote matter. So when stars form, we know that they have a whole bunch of hydrogen and helium. So we need to use that somehow. But there are, from that gas cloud, there could be these other heavier elements that came about beforehand that could affect how the star evolves. So once we have that condensed cloud of gas and dust, hydrogen and helium into an actual star and it ignites, what happens then? Kind of the star has been born, but how does it live out the rest of its life? And this depends on a few underlying characteristics. And we can simplify it in just this one graph. I know that everyone is thinking the same thing right now. Like I didn't come to a science talk and I didn't want to come to a science talk, but I won't stay in this more. It's more just representative of the fact that we can group these stars based on their mass. This left side from the smallest stars, barely bigger than Jupiter, to these massive, massive stars out in the universe and plot out their lifespan is really kind of cool. But again, this isn't what you came here. I think you wanted to, talk through this with pictures. And to do that, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of these properties of stars that we can actually see and observe. First, every single star is a particular color. And this color is based on its temperature. If you assume that you have just black body radiation, this is just a maximally efficient transmitter of heat. It's going to be one of these colors from reddish to blue for the temperature that stars kind of are at. So every single star falls in the spectrum. Our sun is somewhere right in the middle, and that's based on the temperature. But it's also based partially on how big the star is as well. So the largest stars are these massive blue giant stars, whereas our smallest stars are these little tiny red dwarfs and brown dwarfs. Think of it like a classical fire. If you have a really hot, jet engine afterburner, that's going to be bluish white. If you have a matchstick or a candle, that's going to be more on the reddish and yellowish side. Same sort of deal for stars. These larger stars have so much more mass in them that they can actually burn brighter and put out more energy, and that causes the temperature of the star to increase, and thus the color change based on that. I mentioned that it's going to be brighter, so let's dim these colors a little bit. These red stars are really, really hard to see because they're so small. The closest star to us that's not our sun is actually Proxima Centauri, which is one of these red dwarfs. You cannot see it at night. It is just too dim, despite it being the closest star to us outside of our solar system. So if we look back at our picture of Orion, we see all of these blue stars, these massive stars that are burning brightly, some of the brightest in the night sky. And we might be thinking to ourselves, well, those are all blue stars. Where are the rest of them? And this is where we get into how do you actually measure and understand what's going on for these stellar clusters. And what we can do is that we can measure the properties of these stars that we can see from Earth, the color, and thus like the temperature. We can get estimates of their mass based on how bright they are, how close they are, and we can plot those all together in a relationship that we call a Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. So on the vertical line, or the vertical direction, we have how bright that star is. This can be given in luminosity. That's a scale, absolute magnitude, how bright they are if we were a set distance away. Just from looking up at the night sky normally, you would see the relative magnitude, which can be adjusted by how far away that star is, what the intervening gas and material looks like, and so on. So we have to take what we're observing in a telescope and correct it to get onto this. But the point of this is more just this slash down the middle. That's the main sequence. That's where stars are born and live and die. So every single star kind of goes through this process. Our sun is right in the middle. It's a main sequence star that has lived for about 5 billion years. And we know that these are all in the main sequence, not because of some relationship between there, but because of how they get their energy. We mentioned that stars are all hydrogen and helium, or for the most part, hydrogen and helium, and they need some way to prevent that further collapse under gravity. And one way that they can do that, and stars in the main sequence do, is through fusing hydrogen together to get helium. And what does that actually look like in practice? Don't worry, no equations, just a fun little 2048 clone on stellar fusion. So the interior of our sun and most stars is primarily hydrogen. If we fuse hydrogen together, we can get a deuteron. This is a hydrogen nucleus, but with an extra neutron on top of it. So it has double the mass, but it's still treated as hydrogen chemically. It's just so common and relevant that like we need to have like a different name for it. If we take a deuteron and fuse hydrogen right onto it, we get helium-3. So this is 2 protons, 1 neutron, still helium chemically, but we can build gradually up to these heavier chemicals. Once we actually have 2 different helium-3s together, we can fuse those together into helium-4 and emit 2 additional protons. So the process of burning hydrogen into helium was taking 4 protons or 4 hydrogen nuclei and turn into 1 helium-4 nucleus. There's a whole bunch of energy that's put out in the form of photons or regular light, neutrinos, and that is what actually provides a pressure against the collapse of the star further under its own mass, under gravity. So by fusing hydrogen together through these different processes, we can prevent the star from actually collapsing down. You may already thinking, we said that the sun is about 5 billion years old. It's going to live for another 5-ish billion years as well. And stars do end up dying. The way they end up dying is first they go through middle age or old age, just like people, unfortunately. And we can look at that in the same way, still using Orion as well. I circled this red star, which is Betelgeuse, because we talked about how red stars are very faint, very, very small, hard to see, but we have one of the brightest stars in the night sky being a red star, and that's Betelgeuse. And the reason for that is that as these stars on the main sequence exhaust their readily available hydrogen fuel, they start to collapse again. They don't have enough pressure to actually keep those outer layers of their atmosphere from falling down in on themselves. So there is this contraction of that star slightly until the point when additional fusion processes can ignite. At that point, the main sequence star, and our sun will be going through this process too, moves off of the main sequence and becomes a red giant. So the star Betelgeuse in Orion, this massive red star, was a main sequence star, but then worked through so much of its life that it's actually in the second stage of its life. So going back to that graph from before, in one of the further boxes down the line, the stellar interior now has to fuse these helium nuclei together in order to provide some sort of pressure against that collapse, because there just isn't enough hydrogen in the burning zone in the stellar interior. The initial process for helium burning is called the triple alpha process, where 3 helium nuclei come together to form a single carbon-12 nucleus. As stars get bigger and hotter, they might go through multiple cycles where they can contract further and then ignite a new process of burning helium. So adding a helium nucleus onto a carbon gives us oxygen. Adding helium onto oxygen gives us neon, I think. But you gradually progress higher and higher up your mass chain until at some point you can't get any more energy from it. I don't want to dwell on that too much, just because when we think about these stars that are going through these different life cycles, we've kind of implicitly talked about how old they are, but we've never really talked about how to actually measure that. And it's tough because populations of stars aren't going to give us their birth certificates or tell us when they were born, but we can look at like total groups of it. This is that same Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. So taking the how bright the star is, what color it is, or what temperature is, how large it is on our axes, and looking at these changes from the main sequence to the red giant stars, which means that stars are aging out of the first part of their life and going on to the second. The light blue and the yellow are 2 different star clusters. They are just large open clusters, but looking at this plot, and this again has been corrected for temperature, color, everything else that comes into play. We see that the point at which those stars are turning off onto the red giant branch is taking place at a different time. The light blue population of stars has more of their stars already transitioned into that red giant phase, which means it's an older cluster, and the stars in it were born before the stars in that yellow group. And that's really interesting. This is one of the if you go through, an astronomy undergrad or read books, this is one of like the preliminary examples for data analysis. How can you identify different populations of stars if you don't know that they're different populations is by using this red giant turnoff. As stars continue to age and go about their life, they can go through something that is very cataclysmic, which would be a nova, become a white dwarf. If they're those massive, massive blue stars, they can go directly into a supernova at the end of their life. They've burned kind of everything on their interior from those extremely high temperatures, made elements up until iron, which at that point, adding more protons or adding more helium onto that actually takes energy away from the star. So the star loses its entire ability to work against its eventual collapse and go supernova. This ejects all of that material from the star, all of those, that hydrogen and helium, all of the interceding elements that it produced, those heavy elements out into the universe for that next generation to stars, for stars to use as what they're collapsing down from. And this stuff is things that we know: oxygen, nitrogen, silicon, all the things that we want to have for something that I think is really, really exciting about our universe is that we have something that's pretty unique in it: online ads. So I'm being a little facetious, but online ads are a really weird thing to get into. And I think life is really weird too. They fit together well. I know a lot of you, including myself, probably don't see ads anymore because you're using an ad blocker. But to remind you of what that looks like, ads are a really good way to ruin a Rickroll. This actually happened to me 2 weeks ago during a company meeting where I sent a Rickroll to someone. They loaded it up while presenting the entire meeting, but they got an ad instead of the actual music video, unfortunately. The way that ads work is an unfortunate topic of information that I do have to go through just to make sure that we know that we have a level set of what we'll talk about after. So how does an actual online advertisement work? Imagine that you are my dog, which thankfully has been very quiet this entire talk, and you're going to a website that happens to support ads. The website itself declares that ads are available and says like, hey, this website is being loaded up, and this person would like to view an ad. You're not explicitly saying that, unfortunately, but implicitly just by going to a website with an ad or any sort of ad tracker, that this is kind of what's going on in the background. These different companies all try to bid on showing their ad to that person based on properties of the user, properties of the computer, maybe what time of day it is, all these different behavioral and contextual signals about how or who is viewing that ad and paying to get their ad in front of it. One of these wins. They pay the highest price for whatever content they want to show out, and they deliver their ad back to that network that's handling these ad transactions. So this payload is not just the ad creative itself, the video that you happen to watch, or the image for a static ad, but it also includes ad trackers, different types of interaction telemetry pickups. There could also be an ad security system at play as well too. But all of that is bundled up and delivered back to the end user's device. They see the ad that they want or maybe don't want, and then continue going about their regular day. So by just browsing the internet, and this is true for websites, for applications, for streaming services, you're gonna unfortunately see ads. So if we know that ads are so pervasive and they happen everywhere else, what about botnets? I know that there were some talks earlier about different ways that you can, effectively commit intrusions and using different types of software to identify this. This is a type of attacker network that's primarily, large scale internet connected devices that are trying to achieve some goal that they can only really get through based on the volume of traffic that they are creating or generating. So a DDoS attack could be considered a botnet. Ad clickers, stream fraud, credential stuffing attacks against a login. In a lot of cases, these are not effective when you're just running a single machine. So you need this whole group of devices, whether those are infected devices that are used by legitimate people or devices that you purchased or connected yourself. You just need a whole bunch of things there to send enough traffic out to those systems. And that's for whatever goal you're trying to achieve. Obviously, it might be for positive purposes, DDoSing a nefarious government, or it could be, in the case of ad fraud, purely to get money. And this is money that is not cryptocurrency you can't spend, but actual real dollars. One thing a botnet is not, it's not a collection of toothbrushes, at least not yet. You probably saw this. Yeah, and there is kind of this fear, uncertainty, and doubt about every single device could become a botnet, thermostats becoming part of botnet. And there is a huge concern there. What usually happens for botnets is that they're either a huge bank of mobile phones that people have purchased, or it's infected virtual servers. So your phone is safe. I also wouldn't connect your phone, or sorry, your toothbrush is safe. I wouldn't connect your toothbrush to the internet. I don't know why you would want to, but in any case, that is something that should be taken into account. So if we're making our own botnet, we need a whole bunch of computers with our malicious code on it. We need to be able to tell those computers to do something like clicking on ads, and then we just run and wait and potentially profit. And it's the second part that my work focuses on, which is that botnet actually doing something. So we won't talk about what's the infection vector, how do you actually get your malicious code on different devices, all that sort of stuff, that intrusion detection work. Instead, we kind of just want to observe what is happening after the fact to identify where that botnet exists and what it's actually trying to do. And within the ad space, it is impersonating real people on real devices to try to get that advertising revenue. And you might think, how does that actually work? Because this bot isn't going to a website or doing anything. But the way that the money flows in the ad tech ecosystem is from advertisers to places that display those ads. So if I set up a really, really poorly designed, low quality website with a whole bunch of ad slots on it, and I send my botnet to that website, so I control both the website that is loading content as well as the devices sending traffic to it, then I'm getting money from those advertisers. And when I set up that website, I might want to impersonate a website that's reputable. I might want to impersonate people that would garner a higher cost, and try to really just look like I'm real users. Because if I'm an ad agency, I don't want my ad being shown to just a server in the middle of nowhere. I want real eyeballs on it. So a botnet, the goal of botnet is to impersonate those real users, location, time considerations, even mouse movements on a website itself. These can all be picked up potentially by the advertising system to understand like, oh yeah, this is clearly a bot or this is clearly an actual user. And there are whole guidelines and restrictions on this. This is from the Interactive Advertising Bureau about this invalid traffic, this botnet traffic that you might want to consider when purchasing ads or as a defense against them. So if we have a whole bunch of devices, we have a whole bunch of computers, we are submitting ad requests for a pretend device or website, then we might want to figure out how can we as observers or threat reachers find that and stop it. There's a whole bunch of ways, and I would love to talk about more of those, but I'm going to focus on one, and that's the operating system distribution. In early 2020, there was a connected TV botnet that myself and my colleagues discovered that was impersonating Roku devices. If you don't know, Rokus are small streaming boxes you would hook up to your TV, or they're already pre-installed in your TV to stream video and music. So instead of that being built into the operating system of the TV itself, it could just be a separate side box, similar to an Apple TV or most modern smart TVs. And the way that that Roku devices work is that their operating system distribution and like their user agent distribution is relatively easy to identify and understand. They publish a lot of information about their operating system's upgrade cadence, but they also go through this really aggressive cycle of deprecating operating systems too. Even before you knew all of that, and I didn't know that until I started looking into this, you might think, well, if I just look at all of the ad traffic available, like the entire ecosystem of online ads, and look for a difference of this operating system distribution or this user agent distribution against what I expect, I might get a graph like this. Whereas the volume of traffic increases, then the overall distribution of the traffic looks more and more similar to the actual distribution of real legitimate devices. Here, this increasing traffic volume is can be considered like traffic to a particular website, or in this case, for the streaming fraud, to a particular application that was installed, quote unquote, on these Roku devices. And the overall distribution is, a chi-square distribution, but take your pick of distance metrics. So in purely legitimate traffic, even when there's no fraud at all, there's still going to be some slight differences from the actual distribution of devices or operating systems or locations, just based on statistical noise. If I have one count or see one ad click on a website, then I can't tell much from that. But if I see hundreds or millions, it becomes much, much easier to understand what's actually going on under for those devices in the underlying distribution. And this is where the story actually starts. So I plotted this and said, hey, yeah, let me get an idea of what regular Roku traffic looks like, see what's going on. And when I made this plot, I saw this tail coming off. Now, based on what we've talked about right now, that tail would be based on the age of the stars as like a turnoff. But here is just, I didn't know what was going on. So once I saw that something disagreed with sort of my mental model of how traffic should look and act like, I started digging into this. You could say, hey, let's measure that, put a decision boundary, and just block whatever's out there and just move on. But that's not always the best thing to do, because adversaries will change. Adversaries will adapt their behavior as you start to intercede them, and especially in the ad tech case where there's so much money to be made, they might adapt on the order of hours or days, depending on when they get that feedback. So if we dig into this traffic more, we can actually get at the root of why there was that difference from the expected traffic. And that's because they just didn't know about the realistic distribution of devices. They had downloaded a list of Roku user agent strings and were just rotating it through um, in like a uniform distribution. I think if anyone here saw, a purely uniform distribution across millions of requests in like a single day, you'd think something fishy was going on, or it was some automated test system. But in this case, the fishiness is the correct answer. So by digging into this, we saw a few different hallmarks of this traffic that we didn't expect. The first was this uniform distribution. Second was the fact that they were using operating systems that were no longer supported by Roku themselves. They just took this list from a couple of years ago and were just running through it. And that difference in age, where they said, I am going to take all of the potential Roku user agents from 5 years ago and use that. That's also a huge issue too. Think of baby names in the United States. That changes over time. So the distribution of those names is going to change over time too. But they didn't think to update it because kind of no one had caught them before. They also messed up a whole bunch of other things within that traffic. I mentioned the operating system version, time day considerations. They were basically quote unquote streaming traffic 24/7, 365 with no breaks, constantly requesting ads across the board. They even messed up stuff in the HTTP header details. So one way in which this botnet worked is that they ran within virtual servers and provided an X-forwarded for header to say, here's the actual end device that's going to consume the ad. If you think that's weird, that's actually really common in streaming services because of the required performance for a streaming system. Think about commercials during regular TV. That's just sort of in the stream itself. So you use these huge beefy servers to stick that into the video stream to then deliver the entire stream to the end service instead of these like kind of two separate chunks. There's a bunch more in terms of the detection, but since we took the time to say like, okay, we have this weird traffic, what are all the things that are weird about it and how can we separate out from the legitimate traffic? We did a better job of responding and tracking that threat over time. And I think that's where the main underlying message of this is that if you can understand what that underlying data generation process is for whatever system you're studying, that can help you get a leg up on what's going on. And that might start just from looking for anomalies. What are the weird things outside of it? And that improves your understanding of the expected system as you go through that. Or you have a hypothesis saying, I expect that the overall distribution of devices is going to look about the same, and you see something different from there. Or even just saying, hey, that operating system was superseded in 2018. I shouldn't see any of it, and making a decision there. But since for botnets, the decisions on what that traffic looks like still comes down to people making those decisions, deciding how am I going to loop over these user agent strings? How am I going to submit these ad requests nefariously? You're really digging at like, what is the person or the people behind that network doing, and how can you stop them by effectively knowing their systems better than they do, or knowing your defensive posture better than they do. And thankfully for a lot of botnets, but also information security as well, defenders do have some level of advantage because they know their systems best. During the course of this work, we worked with Roku to talk to them about what was actually legitimate, what was good within the traffic, and we showed that we had understood some of their systems better than they did, or publicly presented. So really taking the time to dig into not just the what of the traffic that you're seeing, but starting to think about the why of the traffic. Why are stars a particular color? Why is this traffic uniform? Can help get you at the real root cause of what's happening. This is public, so outside of a couple of detection techniques, all of it's available. So this is my previous company where I did this work. They continued investigating this botnet as well as others, a whole bunch of related traffic, partially because of some of the processes and systems that were in place when I was there, but also just really digging into like, how is this traffic? What does this traffic look like, and how can we understand it? And if you're more interested in the first part of the talk, which definitely for me, that's the more interesting one. I always love a good Wikipedia hole. So just starting from nuclear astrophysics and diving through those links, thinking about what's going on. That's a great way to just, learn. I love doing that in college. I still do it. I donate every year. And it's just a great way to get, an initial understanding of something before you then take the next step of like, how can I learn even more about this? Or how can I learn the nitty-gritty of this? So with that, thank you for listening. Hopefully it wasn't hopefully it was not too much information. I know ad tech and stars are complex issues, but be happy to take any questions that there are.
So there aren't currently any questions in the chat, but thank you so much for shedding light on astrophysics, how stars get their energy. That was really cool to see. And I appreciate the science. And I saw many comments in the chat also saying, no, we absolutely did come here for the science talk. So I think you absolutely out of this world in terms of presenting content that people were really excited about. And I know I definitely learned something today.
I love the puns as well too. So so thank you for putting those in. Yeah, the proton chain is the primary where our sun gets energy. You can look directly for that and those equations. It's a really interesting understanding of like how nuclear physics kind of works for something that we see every day. And Big Bang nucleosynthesis. I did pull some books off my shelf, just if you are interested and haven't heard of these before. So, that is not working. Cosmos by Carl Sagan is a great one. Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. And if you're more interested in the explosive end of things, which we didn't really talk about, The End of Everything by Katie Mack is great. And I'll put those in the chat as well too, as my recommendations.
I also a huge fan of Katie. She is a lovely human being and so incredibly smart. Thank you so much, Mike.